When the most powerful man on Earth walked into a small, dirty garage in South Africa, nobody recognized him at first. No cameras, no bodyguards standing at the door, no news reporters waiting outside on the pavement. Just a dusty street, lined with purple flowers, an old radio playing in the corner, and the sound of a wrench turning slowly under a broken-down car. The man standing at the garage door was worth over $200 billion. He had put a car into outer space, and he had built rockets that landed themselves back on the ground like something out of a movie. Presidents returned his phone calls. The whole world knew his name. His name was Elon Musk. And the old man lying under that car, with oil on his hands and grease under his fingernails, and a worn-out pair of overalls that had seen better years. That man was his father. Now, here is what nobody could figure out. Elon Musk was not poor his whole life. He had been a successful engineer, and he had owned properties. He had money. He had lived in one of the nicest neighborhoods in Pretoria, South Africa, with a swimming pool and a big house and a future that looked bright. So why was he here? Why was a 72-year-old man, the father of the richest person alive, fixing other people's broken cars in a small garage on a quiet street for a few $100 a day? The answer has nothing to do with money. When Elon walked into that garage and his father finally looked up and saw him standing there, two men, 30 years of silence between them, a lifetime of things never said hanging in the air like the heat of a Pretoria afternoon. Something happened. Something that nobody outside that garage has fully told. Until now. Because hidden in the back of that workshop, behind the oil cans and the old rags and the tools hanging on the wall, it was a secret that Elon Musk had been keeping for over 20 years. A secret that explains everything. A secret that will completely change the way you see Elon Musk. And when Elon finally discovered it, when he saw what his father had been hiding, a man who had stared down bankruptcy, failure, ridicule, and the weight of trying to change the entire future of the human race without blinking once, that man went quiet. What was in that garage? What had his father been hiding for 20 years? And what did Elon do when he finally found out the truth about the old man under the car? Stay with us for the entire video, because this story starts with a wrench and a broken car on a dusty street in Pretoria. But it ends somewhere that will stay with you for a very long time. The wrench slipped. It caught the skin on Elon Musk's knuckle and tore it open clean. A small thing. The kind of small thing that happens so often in a mechanic's life that you stop flinching. You just press the wound against your overalls, hold it for 3 seconds, and keep turning. Errol pressed, held, kept turning. Outside the garage, Pretoria was going about its business. The November heat sat heavy over the suburb of Waterkloof, like a warm, wet blanket that nobody asked for. Jacaranda trees lined the street, and their purple flowers covered the pavement in soft, bruised piles. A dog barked somewhere behind a wall. A minibus taxi honked twice and rattled past. Inside the garage, the only sounds were the slow spin of a metal fan, an old radio playing something nobody was really listening to, and the steady voice of a wrench talking to a rusted bolt. Elon Musk was 72 years old. He was lying on his back on a piece of cardboard under a 1987 Ford Cortina that had seen better decades. His white hair was damp at the temples. The skin on his forearms was the deep brown of a man who had spent a lifetime under the South African sun. His hands, the hands of a trained electromechanical engineer, a man who had once designed complex systems and managed serious projects, were the hands of a garage mechanic now. Scarred, stained, strong in the way that only constant, grinding work makes a person strong. He had been here since 7 in the morning. It was now past 2 in the afternoon. A pair of worn boots appeared at the edge of the cortina. Small boots. The boots of someone young who did not yet understand that crouching next to someone who clearly does not want company is a social risk. Said the voice above the boots. Old man. The Afrikaans word for uncle, used the way South African children use it for any older man they do not quite know what to call. Why are you still working? The other guys all went for lunch. Errol did not answer. The bolt gave. Finally. And the satisfaction of it moved through his wrist and up his arm like a small private reward. He put the bolt carefully into the tray beside him. He picked up the next one. I heard you, Errol said. His voice was low, not unfriendly, just the voice of a man who had learned to keep most things inside and had gotten very good at it over a very long time. So why? The boy asked. Errol put the wrench down on his chest. He stared up at the underside of the cortina, at the rusted chassis, at the years of road salt and grime and hard living pressed into the metal above his face. Because the car is not finished, he said, and I do not leave things unfinished. The boots were quiet for a moment. Then the boy sat down cross-legged on the concrete floor. His name was Sipho Dlamini. He was 12 years old, all elbows and questions, and he had discovered several weeks ago that if he showed up at Umberti's workshop after school, the old man's wife would sometimes bring out bread with apricot jam. That was the original reason he came. But somewhere along the way, the old mechanic had become the more interesting thing. Sipho picked up a newspaper from the floor. It must have blown in from the street. He unfolded it. A face stared back at him from the front page. He had seen this face before. On the television at school during current events. On a billboard near the N1 highway. On the cover of a magazine in the dentist's waiting room. On a poster his science teacher had put on the classroom wall under the words, "Dare to think bigger." He turned the newspaper around to show the man under the car. Sipho said. This man. They say he is the richest person alive. They say he shot a car into space. The wrench stopped, not slowly, immediately. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before it. This one had weight. Then this one pressed down on the garage the way the heat pressed down on the street outside. Then Errol slid out from under the cortina. He lay on his back on the cardboard for a moment, blinking up at the corrugated iron roof. Then he pushed himself up to sitting and took the newspaper from Sipho's hands. He looked at the photograph for a long time. His jaw tightened. Something moved through his face. Not anger, not jealousy, not bitterness. Though he had known all of those things in his life, and they had left their marks on him, this was something different, something quieter, something that looked, if you were watching closely enough, exactly like love. He folded the newspaper. Once, twice. He tucked it into the breast pocket of his overalls, right over the left side of his chest. Yes, he said softly. Do you know him? Sipho asked. Errol picked up his wrench. He looked at it. He looked at the underside of the cortina waiting for him. Go home, Sipho, he said gently. It is getting late. He slid back under the car. The fan turned. The radio played. The afternoon light moved slowly across the concrete floor, and the name on the front page of that folded newspaper, pressed now against Elon Musk's heartbeat, was Elon. But to understand why that name meant what it meant to the old man under that car, You have to go back. You have to go back past the garage. I passed the overalls and the rusted bolts and the fan turning slow in the November heat. You have to go back past the decades and the distance and the silence that had grown between a father and a son like a wall built one brick at a time, so slowly that neither of them noticed how tall it had become until they were standing on opposite sides of it and could no longer see each other at all. You have to go back to the beginning. June 28, 1971. Pretoria, South Africa. And a baby boy was born at a hospital in the capital city, in a country that was still locked inside the injustice of apartheid. The jacaranda trees were not yet blooming. That would come in November. But the city was warm, and the sky over Waterkloof was wide and blue and indifferent to the small, screaming, extraordinary life that had just arrived in it. They named him Elon Reeve Musk. Errol and May Musk were his parents. Errol was an electromechanical engineer, sharp, driven, a man who understood machines the way some men understand music. He made good money. The family lived in Waterkloof, the same suburb where decades later Errol would end up lying on cardboard under a Ford Cortina. In those early years, though, the house had a swimming pool and a garden, and the sense that things were going in the right direction. From the very beginning, Elon was not a normal child. This is not something said to make him sound special for the sake of a story. It is simply what everyone who knew him then will tell you. By age 9, he had read every book in his school library. Every single one. When there were no more books, he read encyclopedias. Both volumes, cover to cover, the way other children read comics. He did not talk much. He did not play much. He was somewhere else, always. Somewhere inside his own mind, building things nobody else could yet see. Other children did not understand him. And children are not always kind to what they do not understand. There is a story, confirmed by people close to the Musk family, of a group of boys at his school who beat Elon so badly one afternoon that he was taken to hospital. His nose was broken. His face was swollen beyond recognition. He came home looking like something that had been unmade and not yet put back together. He was 12 years old. He did not cry about it. Not in the way you would expect. He went quiet instead. And the quietness that came into him after that day was a different kind of quiet than the one before. It was the quiet of a person who has decided something, who has made a private agreement with himself about how things are going to go from now on. At home, things were also becoming quieter, but not in a good way. Errol and May's marriage was falling apart along the invisible seams that marriages fall apart along. The small daily disappointments, the incompatibilities that seem manageable at first and then do not. The slow drift of two people moving in directions that no longer overlap. In 1980, when Elon was 9 years old, they divorced. May took the children, Elon, his younger brother Kimball, and his younger sister Tosca, and built a life on her own terms. She was a remarkable woman, May Musk, a model and a dietitian who would one day appear on magazine covers in her 70s and prove to the world that she had never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. She did not fall apart when the marriage ended. She stood up straighter. But then came the decision that surprised everyone. Elon, at age 10, chose to go and live with his father. He has never explained it fully. Not in any interview, not in any public statement. The closest he has come is a quiet comment made years later, and almost in passing, that his father had seemed lonely, that he had not wanted to leave him alone. Think about that for a moment. A 10-year-old boy, bullied at school, living in a country built on injustice, watching his family come apart, and his response is to worry about his father's loneliness. That is the kind of boy Elon was. He moved into Errol's house. He grew up inside those walls, and he listened to his father talk about engineering and machines, and the way the world worked, and the way things could be built better. Some of those years had light in them. Some were very dark. What happened inside those walls is mostly private. But Elon has spoken, in a 2017 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, in words that do not leave room for misunderstanding. He called his father a terrible human being. He said almost every bad thing you could imagine his father had done. And those are heavy words. They are also Elon's words. Whatever the truth of those years, and truth in families is almost never one clean thing, something was damaged between a father and a son during that time. Something that bent under weight and never completely straightened. Like metal stressed past its limit. Like a bolt turned the wrong way. Too many times, too hard. And so, eventually, something had to give. In 1988, Elon Musk was 17 years old, and he had already made a decision so quietly and so completely that by the time anyone around him understood it, it was already done. The decision was simple. The decision was everything. He was leaving. South Africa in 1988 was a country holding its breath. Apartheid was crumbling at its edges, but had not yet fallen. The government was white. The laws were unjust in ways that reached into every ordinary day and poisoned it. And young white men of Elon's age were expected, required, to serve in the South African military when they turned 18. A military that existed in large part to enforce a system that Elon wanted absolutely no part of. But there was more than that pulling him toward the door. He had been reading American magazines, computing magazines, technology magazines. He had been reading about a place called Silicon Valley in California, where young people with strange ideas and fast computers were building things that were changing the world. He had read about companies being born in garages, about engineers who were treated like rock stars, about a culture that did not laugh at big thinking, but instead handed it money and said, "Go further." He did not want to be in Pretoria. He wanted to be there. The practical problem was getting out. South Africa did not make it easy for young men to simply walk away before completing military service. But Elon had been thinking about this the way he thought about every problem, carefully, methodically, from every angle, until the solution showed itself. His mother, May, had been born in Canada. That meant Elon had a claim to Canadian citizenship through her family line. It was a door, a narrow one. But Elon had never needed a door to be wide, and he just needed it to be open enough to get through. He applied for a Canadian passport. It came through. In 1989, at 18 years old, Elon Musk packed a single suitcase. He said goodbye to South Africa the way you say goodbye to something you have complicated feelings about, which is to say, without quite enough words, and with too many things left unsaid. He boarded a plane. He did not look back through the window as Johannesburg shrank beneath him. The people who knew him then say he was not the looking back type. He was already thinking forward, already somewhere else in his mind, already building the next thing. Canada was cold and enormous, and indifferent to who he was. Good, Elon probably thought. Start from nothing. Build from scratch. He slept on floors. He stayed with distant relatives who barely knew him. He worked at a farm in Saskatchewan during harvest season, waking before the sun and falling into bed after dark. And he got a job at a lumber mill in British Columbia, doing the kind of physical work that teaches you exactly what your body is made of. He cleaned out boiler rooms in an engineering plant for $18 an hour. wearing a hazmat suit in the dark and the heat. He did not complain. He worked. Then Queen's University in Ontario. Then a transfer to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Oh, then not one degree, but two, economics and physics, from an Ivy League institution that had no idea it was educating someone who would one day be worth more than the entire economy of some of the countries whose students sat beside him in class. Then Stanford University, a PhD program in energy physics, one of the most prestigious programs in the world. He lasted exactly 2 days. He withdrew from the program, packed up again. I'd walked out into California sunlight with nothing but his mind and his stubbornness and a certainty that was either genius or madness, and turned out to be both at once. He was going to start a company. That company became Zip2, a digital city guide for newspapers. In 1999, Compaq bought it for $307 million. Elon was 27 years old. He took his share, $22 million, and did not buy a house or a car or a holiday. See, he put it directly into his next idea. Then X.com, which became PayPal, which eBay bought for $1.5 billion in 2002. Then SpaceX, founded in 2002 when everyone in the aerospace industry told him he was going to lose everything. Then Tesla, which he joined in 2004 and which almost bankrupted him twice before it changed the entire automobile industry. The boy who had been beaten bloody in a Pretoria schoolyard. The boy who had read encyclopedias for company. The boy who had worried about his lonely father and moved into his house out of love, and then left that same house carrying wounds nobody could see. That boy had become something the world had never quite seen before. Back in Pretoria, in a house that was quieter now and smaller than it used to be, Elon Musk watched from a distance that grew longer every year, and the distance between them was no longer measured in kilometers. It was measured in years of silence, and in things said that could not be unsaid, in things never said that should have been. But silence is not nothing. Silence is a living thing. It grows in the spaces between people the way weeds grow in cracked concrete. Slowly, persistently, until one day the crack is so wide that the concrete itself begins to shift and separate, and you can no longer remember what it looked like, whole. Elon Musk's life, after Elon left, moved along its own complicated road. He had been a successful man once. That part was real and documented. He had designed and managed electromechanical engineering projects across South Africa. He had owned properties in Pretoria and beyond. He had money and the kind of standing that money provides in a city like Pretoria, where what you own and what you drive and which suburb you live in tells people who they are allowed to think you are. But life has a way of dismantling things, bad investments, poor decisions, the slow, but expensive unraveling that comes when the structures holding a life together, marriage, family, professional momentum, come apart not all at once but one piece at a time, so gradually that you do not notice how much has gone until you look around one ordinary morning and realize that the house is smaller, the account is thinner, and the future looks nothing like the one you had imagined. There is a man named Dion Fourie who remembers Errol from those middle years. Dion is in his late 60s now. He lives on a small farm outside Pretoria near the town of Cullinan, where the famous diamond was found in 1905. A town that understands, perhaps better than most, that valuable things are often buried deep and covered in rough and ordinary stone. Dion worked alongside Errol in the early 1990s on an engineering project in Johannesburg. They were not close friends. Says, but they spent enough hours together in the same rooms and the same sites to develop the kind of knowledge of a person that comes not from conversations, but from observation. Errol was brilliant, Dayan would say years later. The kind of brilliant that is uncomfortable to be around because it makes you aware of your own limits. He could look at a broken machine and tell you what was wrong before he touched it, just by listening to it, just by looking. He paused, and then he added something quieter. He just could not do the same thing with people. By the early 2000s, Errol's financial situation had changed significantly. The properties were gone. The engineering work had dried up in the way that work dries up for men of a certain age, in a certain field when the industry moves on and does not send a forwarding address. He was living in a smaller house in Waterkloof, still the same suburb, still the same jacaranda-lined streets, but a different version of the life he had once lived there. And then came the news that traveled around the world. In the early 2000s, Errol had begun a relationship with a young woman named Jana Bezuidenhout. Jana had been, in a previous chapter of their intertwined lives, his stepdaughter from an earlier relationship. The nature of this connection shocked Errol's remaining family. It made headlines when it became public years later. Elon addressed it in a 2017 interview with Rolling Stone, saying only that it did not surprise him. That very little his father did surprised him anymore. In 2017, Errol and Jana had a son together. Elon Musk was 72 years old when that boy was born. He named him Elliot Rush Musk. The world found the story strange and uncomfortable. Errol did not seem to care what the world found it. He had long since stopped managing other people's opinions of him. That is sometimes what happens to a man when enough time has passed and enough things have fallen away. He stops pretending. He stops performing the version of himself that other people find acceptable. Whether that honesty is admirable or simply the absence of shame is a question each person must answer for themselves. What it meant practically was this. Elon Musk at 72 was a new father again, living in a reduced version of his former life. See, in the same suburb where he had once been a man of standing, working now at Bertie's mechanical workshop on Linwood Road for reasons that were partly financial and partly something harder to name. Bertie, whose full name was Albertus Pretorius, though nobody had called him that since his school days, was a broad, slow-moving man with a gray beard and the permanent squint of someone who had spent 40 years looking into engines. He had run his workshop for 3 decades, and he knew cars the way Errol knew machines. When Errol appeared at his door one morning in 2013, asking if there was work, Bertie looked at his hands and said yes, without asking any other questions. Hands tell you what you need to know. The workshop smelled of diesel and rubber and iron. A radio on the shelf played old Afrikaans music from a station that seemed to exist outside of time. A calendar from 2011 hung on the wall near the door. Nobody changed it. It had become part of the wall. See, Errol came in every morning at 7. He drank his coffee black. He worked until 3. He went home. He did not talk about his life. He did not talk about his past. The other mechanics, younger men mostly, who called him Errol and treated him with the careful respect that South Africans tend to extend to old men who carry themselves with quiet authority, learned quickly that certain questions would be met with silence so complete it was almost physical. But there was one thing they all noticed. Every time the radio caught a news report about SpaceX, about Tesla, about the man on the magazine covers and the billboards and the science classroom walls, Elon Musk would stop. He would put down whatever was in his hands. He would listen. His face would go completely still. Not empty, not blank. but still in the way that deep water is still. Calm on the surface, everything happening underneath. Then the report would end. And without a word, without a change of expression, he would pick up his tools and go back to work. Every single time. The younger mechanics noticed it. They talked about it quietly among themselves during lunch, sitting on upturned crates outside the workshop with their sandwiches and their cold drinks, speaking in the low voices people use when they are discussing something that does not belong to them but has gotten under their skin anyway. Have you seen the way Errol goes quiet when they talk about that Musk fellow on the radio? Said a young mechanic named Rian Botha one afternoon. Rian was 24, born the same year Elon had arrived in Canada with his suitcase and his ambitions. He had kind eyes and grease permanently embedded in the lines of his palms, the occupational tattoo of his trade. The others nodded. They had all seen it. "You think they know each other?" Rian asked. Nobody answered. It because the answer was obvious to all of them, even if none of them were ready to say it out loud. You do not go still like that for a stranger. You do not stop breathing like that for someone you merely recognize from the news. That stillness was personal. That stillness had history in it. But nobody asked Errol directly. You did not ask Errol directly about personal things. The silence around that subject was the kind that communicates its own rules without needing to state them. Like a fence with no gate. You can see through it. You simply cannot go in. What the mechanics did not know, what almost nobody knew, was that Errol had tried. Not once, several times, over the years. He had picked up the phone and put it down again more times than he could count. He had started letters and torn them up. He had composed things in his head during the long, quiet afternoons under cars that he never found a way to put into words that satisfied him. The words always came out wrong. Too proud or too sorry or too late or too much of all three things at once. But in the spring of 2016, he finished one. He sat at the small table in his kitchen in the early morning before the sun was properly up, with a pen and a sheet of paper and a cup of coffee that went cold before he was done. He wrote slowly. He crossed things out. He rewrote them. He tore up 2 full pages before the third one held something close enough to what he meant to say, and he folded it. He sealed it. He addressed it to the SpaceX office in Hawthorne, California. He walked to the post box at the end of his street and stood there for a long time with the envelope in his hand. Then he posted it. He walked home. He did not sleep well that night, or the several nights after it. The envelope arrived at the SpaceX office on a Tuesday morning in late April 2016. A member of the administrative staff, a thorough woman named Priya Nair, who had worked at SpaceX for 3 years and who handled correspondence with the careful professionalism of someone who understood that her job required discretion above almost everything else, placed it in the tray reserved for personal correspondence. It had a South African postmark, a Pretoria postmark. It sat in the tray for 4 days. On the 5th day it was opened. What was inside that envelope? Nobody outside of a very small number of people has ever confirmed. It is not the kind of thing that gets leaked. It is not the kind of thing that ends up in a news report, or a biography, or a podcast interview. It belongs to the category of things that happen between 2 people and stay there, sealed as completely as the envelope it arrived in. What we know is that no written reply went back to Pretoria. No phone call was recorded, no email traced, no visit arranged. The envelope went in, and the silence came back out. And in the workshop on Linwood Road, Elon Musk came in the next morning at 7, drank his coffee black, and went to work. He did not tell anyone he was waiting for something. He did not tell anyone that a part of him checked the postbox at the end of his street every morning for weeks afterward, standing in the early light in his overalls, looking in, finding nothing, and walking back to the house with his hands in his pockets. He simply came in and worked and listened to the radio and waited with the particular patience of a man who has run out of the right to demand anything but has not yet run out of hope entirely. Young Saifo, sitting outside on the curb one afternoon in late October 2018, eating his bread and apricot jam and watching the old man work, could not have known any of this. He knew only that Errol had a newspaper folded over his heart, and that some silences, even in a noisy world, are louder than anything on the radio. But sometimes, without warning, without announcement, without the world being given any opportunity to prepare itself, silence breaks. It breaks the way dawn breaks over the high veld. Not with drama, not with noise, just a slow, inevitable lightening at the edge of things until suddenly the dark is gone and you are standing in a completely different kind of day. In November 2018, Elon Musk flew to South Africa. This did not make the news, not at the time. Not in the way his other movements made the news. The product launches and the earnings calls and the late-night tweets that moved markets and started arguments across the entire connected world. This was a different kind of trip entirely. The quiet kind. The kind that famous people sometimes manage when they are determined enough and when the people around them understand, without being told explicitly, that this is not for public consumption. He had legitimate business in Cape Town. Early-stage discussions involving energy infrastructure and telecommunications. The kind of broad, future-facing conversations that Elon had been having with governments and institutions around the world as his companies extended their reach further into the fabric of how the world worked. The meetings lasted 2 days. They were productive. They concluded. And then his schedule showed something unusual. A gap. 2 full days with nothing scheduled. No press. No interviews. No appearances. No activity on his social media accounts that would place him anywhere specific. His private plane flew north from Cape Town to OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg. From there, a car was arranged through a local executive transport company. The driver was a man named Thomas Dlamini. Thomas was 43 years old, originally from Soweto, a man who had been navigating the roads of Gauteng province for 15 years with the calm, unhurried competence of someone who has learned that the most important quality in his profession is the ability to be completely present without being intrusive. He had driven ministers and CEOs and visiting dignitaries from a dozen different countries. He understood without being taught that what happened in the back seat of his car was not his business and would not become his story. He picked up his passenger outside the arrivals terminal. He did not ask where they were going right away. Now he simply drove in the direction he had been given in the booking, heading east on the N12 toward Pretoria, and waited. The man in the back seat was quiet. Thomas had driven quiet passengers before. There are different kinds of quiet. There is the quiet of someone on their phone, half present, conducting their actual life somewhere else. There is the quiet of someone sleeping, or someone exhausted, or someone who simply does not feel like talking. And then there is another kind of quiet altogether. The kind that is full rather than empty. The kind that comes from someone doing something internally that requires all of them, leaving nothing over for conversation. That was the quiet in the back seat. Thomas drove. The high veld opened up around them. The landscape of Gauteng in November is a particular kind of beautiful. Flat and golden and enormous. The dry grasslands stretching to every horizon under a sky so blue, it seems almost aggressive in its intensity. Power lines ran parallel to the highway, strung between towers that marched away into the distance like the skeletons of giants. Roadside vendors sat under umbrellas, selling mangoes and phone chargers and small South African flags. Minibus taxis cut between lanes with cheerful disregard for physics. Elon watched it all through the window. Once, as they passed a highway sign indicating the turnoff for a suburb north of Johannesburg, he said something quietly, almost to himself. "My brother and I used to catch tadpoles in a stream near here." Thomas glanced in the mirror. He said nothing. He nodded once, the small professional nod that means, "I heard you. This is safe. You do not owe me anything more." Elon went back to the window. They reached Waterkloof 40 minutes later. The streets narrowed and quieted. The jacaranda trees appeared, lining both sides of the road, their branches meeting overhead in places to form a soft purple tunnel of falling flowers. November was peak jacaranda season in Pretoria. The pavement was carpeted in them. They lay in drifts against garden walls and gathered in the gutters and covered the rooftops of parked cars in a layer of small purple trumpets, as though the city were being gently buried in something beautiful. Elon asked Thomas to stop. He got out of the car, and he stood on the pavement for a moment without moving. He looked up at the jacaranda trees. The light came through the branches in broken pieces, shifting and dappling, the way light moves through things it cannot quite get past. Then he walked. He walked the way someone walks when they are following memory rather than directions. Slowly, stopping occasionally, to turning corners with the slight hesitation of a person checking whether the corner they remember is the same as the corner that is actually there. Some things had changed. New walls, a different gate, a house painted a color it had not been before. But the bones of the place were the same. The bones of a place almost always stay the same. He turned onto a smaller street. He passed a dry cleaning shop with a hand-painted sign. He passed a grocery store where an elderly woman was buying tomatoes and arguing gently with the man behind the weighing scale. He passed a concrete fence with a faded South African flag painted across it, the paint cracked and peeling at the edges, the colors still recognizable beneath the years. He stopped. Ahead of him, 30 meters up the street, a garage door was rolled open to the afternoon. Inside, a fan was turning slowly. A radio was playing. A man was crouched beside the rear wheel of a vehicle, working with the focused, economical movements of someone who has performed this particular kind of work so many times that his hands know what to do before his mind has finished telling them. The man had white hair, brown, deeply weathered skin, overalls with a dark stain above the left knee. Elon stood at the edge of the shade on the open street and looked into the garage, and he stood there long enough for a gecko on the wall beside him to notice him, consider him, and decide he was not interesting. He was interesting. He was the most watched human being on Earth in 2018. But here, on this street, in this suburb, under these jacaranda trees, he was something much more specific than that. He was a son, standing outside his father's garage, trying to remember how to walk through a door. Inside, something shifted. The man crouching by the wheel paused, so he tilted his head slightly, the way animals do when a sound reaches them that has not quite resolved into meaning yet. Then, slowly, he turned. He looked toward the garage door. He looked at the figure standing in the afternoon light. For a moment, the radio played into a silence so complete that the falling of a jacaranda flower somewhere behind Elon was almost audible. Then Elon Musk straightened up. He straightened slowly, and the way men straighten when their bodies have been at this, long enough to need a moment to agree to the change. He stood to his full height. He looked at the person in the doorway. His face did something that took every year of his 72 years to produce. "Elon," he said. Just the name. Just the one word that contained, if you listened carefully enough, everything that had not been said in the 30 years since a boy with a suitcase had boarded a plane and not looked back. But Elon stepped into the garage. He did not rush. He did not speak immediately. He moved the way he always moved when he entered a new space. Taking it in first, reading it, understanding its geometry and its contents before engaging with it. It was the habit of an engineer. It was also, perhaps, the habit of a person buying themselves a few extra seconds before having to feel something fully. He looked at the pegboard on the wall where tools hung in careful order, spanners arranged by size, the screwdrivers in a row, pliers hanging by their handles like a small metal chorus. He looked at the oil drums stacked in the corner, at the concrete floor, dark with decades of stains that had become part of the floor itself, at the old radio on the shelf, still playing to a garage that had stopped listening to it the moment Elon appeared in the doorway. He looked at his father. Errol had not moved from where he stood. He was watching Elon with an expression that was difficult to read because it was made up of too many things happening simultaneously. The way a piece of music can be in a minor key and a major key at the same time, and somehow make sense of both. Bertie was not in the workshop that afternoon. He had gone to collect a part from a supplier across town. Rian Botha had left an hour earlier. The workshop was empty except for the two of them and the slow-turning fan and the radio and the particular quality of afternoon light that falls in long, pale rectangles through a garage door facing west. Errol pulled a plastic chair from against the wall. He set it in the middle of the floor. He offered it to Elon with a gesture that was not quite formal and not quite comfortable. The gesture of a man who does not have guests often and has had to remember in real time how hosting works. See, Elon sat. Errol found a wooden crate and sat across from him. They were perhaps 2 meters apart. They were perhaps 30 years apart. The distance between those two measurements was the whole story. Outside, Sifo Dlamini arrived in the way he always arrived. Unannounced, unhurried, drawn by the combined magnetism of apricot jam and the company of the old mechanic who never sent him away. He came around the side of the building, school bag hanging off one shoulder, still wearing his uniform, and then stopped dead at the entrance to the garage. He saw 2 men sitting across from each other on a chair and a crate. He saw the air between them. He could not have named what he was seeing. He was 12 years old and had not yet accumulated enough living to have the vocabulary for it. But something in the way the 2 men were sitting, the careful, charged stillness of it, I had the sense that the wrong sound could disturb something irreplaceable, reached him at a level that had nothing to do with vocabulary. He backed away from the doorway without making a sound. He sat down on the curb outside. He put his school bag on his knees. He waited, without knowing what he was waiting for, because it seemed like the right thing to do. Inside, Elon spoke first. "Why are you here?" he said. His voice was even, not cold, not warm. See, the voice of a man who has learned to keep his register neutral when the situation is anything but. "Why this? Why are you doing this?" Errol looked at his hands. He turned them over in his lap, palms up, then palms down. The hands of a 72-year-old man who had worked with them his whole life. They were a map of everything, every project, every mistake, every morning at 7 with a black coffee and a car that needed fixing. He did not answer the question. Not yet. Instead, he stood up. He crossed the workshop slowly to the far wall where a metal shelf held the accumulated necessities of the trade. Cans of WD-40, boxes of rags, a container of workshop soap with a pump that no longer worked, a row of manuals for vehicle models going back to the 1980s. Behind all of it, pushed to the back of the shelf where it would not be casually seen, was a red metal toolbox. It was the large, old-fashioned kind, square and solid, and with a carry handle on top and a clasp on the front that had been opened and closed so many times the chrome was worn to bare metal underneath. The red paint was gone at all the corners, showing the gray steel beneath. It was the toolbox of a working life. Errol carried it to the workbench. He set it down. He unclasped the lid. He lifted it open. The top layer was what you would expect: a socket set in a molded tray, a torque wrench, combination spanners in graduating sizes, feeler gauges, the ordinary contents of a working mechanic's box, each item in its place, each item worn to the specific shape of the hands that had used it longest. Errol lifted out the top tray. Underneath was something else entirely. Paper. Folded paper. Printed pages. Magazine pages. Carefully cut and folded. Newspaper clippings, some yellowed at the edges, some still holding their original color. Printed web pages from the years before printing web pages had stopped being a thing people did. See a CNN printout from 1999 with the headline about the Zip-2 sale, a Time magazine cover from 2010, a photograph from the first successful Falcon 9 landing, printed on regular paper in black and white, because whoever had printed it did not have a color printer, but had printed it anyway. A South African car magazine review of the Tesla Model S from 2013, with a note in the margin in Errol's handwriting. 4 words, in Afrikaans, Hy het dit reggekry. He got it right. And there were more than 100 of them. Laid flat beneath everything else, smoothed carefully as though it had been pressed under a heavy book, was a photograph. A small boy, 7 or 8 years old, standing beside a bicycle on a patch of dry Pretoria lawn, one hand on the handlebar, squinting into the sun, smiling in the uncomfortable way that children smile when a parent says smile and they are trying to cooperate. But the sun is in their eyes, and smiling on command has never felt entirely natural. Elon picked up the photograph. He turned it over. On the back, in handwriting, he had not seen in decades, but recognized immediately and completely, the way you recognize certain things, not with your eyes, but with somewhere deeper than that. 4 words: my son, my boy. The radio played. The fan turned. A jacaranda flower drifted through the open garage door and settled on the concrete floor between them without a sound. Elon held the photograph in both hands and did not speak. Outside on the curb, Saifo sat with his school bag on his knees, looking at nothing in particular, and felt, without understanding why, that his eyes had gone wet. He wiped them quickly with the back of his hand. He looked around to make sure nobody had seen. The street was empty, just the jacarandas dropping their flowers in the slow, indifferent way that nature drops beautiful things, without ceremony, without audience, without any concern for whether anyone is watching or not. He stayed where he was. Inside the garage, Elon was still holding the photograph. He held it the way you hold something that is simultaneously very small and very heavy, and the way you hold something that has crossed a great distance to reach you and arrived in a condition you were not prepared for. His thumbs rested lightly on the edges. His eyes were fixed on the face of the small boy, squinting into the Pretoria sun. He set it down carefully on the workbench. He looked at the 100 clippings spread before him. He did not touch them. He just looked. He read the headlines he already knew, from the inside of the events they described. He saw the dates, and he understood, doing the quiet mathematics of it, that this collection had been built across more than 2 decades, that it had begun when he was still young and the world had barely heard of him, that every significant moment of his public life was represented here, cut out and folded and kept in the dark under a layer of wrenches in a red toolbox in a garage in Pretoria. He looked up at his father. Errol was standing on the other side of the workbench. He had his hands on the edge of it, not gripping it, just resting there. He was looking at the clippings too, with the expression of a man who has been caught at something private and has decided, after a long moment of internal negotiation, that he is not going to pretend he was not doing it. "Tell me," Elon said quietly. It was not a demand. It was not a question exactly either. It was the specific tone of a person who has waited long enough that the waiting itself has become a kind of asking. Our Errol was silent for a moment longer. Then he began to speak. He spoke slowly, carefully, with the particular cadence of a man who has not spoken about something for so long that the words have calcified inside him and have to be broken loose one at a time before they can be said. His voice was low. It did not waver. Elon Musk had never been the kind of man whose voice wavered, but there was something underneath the steadiness that was not steady at all. He said that he knew he had not been a good father. He did not qualify it. He did not add the word always, or sometimes, or in certain ways. He said it plainly, the way you say a thing when you have spent long enough alone with it to have worn away all the softening edges. He had not been a good father. He knew what he had done. He knew what it had cost. He was not standing here to excuse any of it. But then he said something else. He said that after Elon left South Africa in 1989, something happened to him that he had never been able to name properly until he was old enough and honest enough and tired enough of carrying it without a name. He said that every time he saw Elon's face on a screen or on a page, he felt 2 things at exactly the same time. And the 2 things were so contradictory that for years they had simply canceled each other out, leaving him with nothing he could act on. The first thing he felt was pride. Not ordinary pride. Not the manageable kind that you can mention at a dinner table and then put away. The kind of pride that fills the entire chest cavity and has nowhere to go. The kind that is almost indistinguishable from pain. He was proud in the way that a person is proud when something they were part of making, however imperfectly, however inadequately, turns out to be extraordinary. Every rocket that lifted off that launch pad at Cape Canaveral, at every Tesla that changed the way the world thought about what a car could be, every impossible thing that Elon did that the world said could not be done, and that Elon did anyway. Errol felt every single one of them somewhere beneath his ribs. And then, immediately, the second thing. Shame. Because what right did he have to that pride? He asked himself this constantly. Well, what right did he have to stand in a garage in Waterkloof and feel his chest swell when the radio announced another SpaceX achievement? He had not built that. He had not supported it. He had not been there for the years of grinding, relentless work that Elon had put in on foreign soil. Alone, without the safety net of family or home. He had not been a good father during the years when a good father might have actually mattered. And he had been demanding and difficult and absent in all the ways that leave the deepest marks. So the pride had nowhere clean to land. Every time he felt it, the shame came immediately after, like a shadow that belongs to the light and cannot be separated from it. And the combination of those 2 things, the enormous pride and the immediate shame had paralyzed him for 30 years. It had kept the phone in its cradle. It had torn up the letters before they were finished. It had made the one letter he finally sent in 2016 come out as less than he meant, smaller than the thing inside him that had written it. He stopped speaking. He looked at the clippings on the workbench. He said, "The cars." He said that working on engines, working with his hands on machines, was the only language he had left that connected him to Elon. Elon had grown up listening to him talk about machines. Machines had been the one common ground between them, the one frequency on which they had sometimes, briefly, managed to hear each other clearly. So he came back to machines. Not only because he needed the work, though he did, but because when his hands were on an engine, turning a bolt, solving the particular problem of a particular broken thing, he felt in some way he could not fully explain and did not try to, that he was still speaking to his son. Every car he fixed was a sentence. On every engine that came back to life was a paragraph in a letter he did not know how to write any other way. He was trying, in the only language still available to him, to be worthy of what his son had become. The garage was very quiet. The fan turned above them. The radio had drifted into a soft instrumental that nobody was listening to. Through the open garage door, the late afternoon sun was turning the jacaranda flowers on the pavement a deeper shade of gold. See, Elon stood on his side of the workbench. He is not a man who cries. People who have worked alongside him through failed launches and near bankruptcies and the most brutal pressures that the modern world can generate will tell you they have never seen it. He keeps the hardest things in the hardest places inside himself, behind walls that were built young and built strong and have held against a great deal. But something was happening in his face. It was not a dramatic thing, and it was not the kind of thing that would read on a camera or translate into a headline. It was subtle and private, and completely real. The set of his jaw changed. The line of his shoulders changed. Something that had been braced for a very long time shifted, almost imperceptibly, towards something that was not braced at all. He looked like a son, not the most watched man on earth, not the person on the magazine covers and the classroom walls and the billboards on the N1 highway. He not the one who had launched a car into space and built rockets that landed themselves back on their launch pads like something from a science fiction novel that reality had decided to plagiarize. He looked like a boy from Pretoria, standing in a garage, holding a photograph of himself. He set it down. He set it down gently, the way you set down something you have decided not to put back where it came from. He placed it flat on the workbench beside the clippings, beside the magazine covers and the printed pages, and the South African car magazine with the 4 Afrikaans words in the margin. He placed it where it could be seen, where it did not have to live in the dark under a layer of wrenches anymore. Neither of them spoke for a while. This silence was different from all the silences that had come before it. The silences before had been walls. This one was something closer to an open field, still quiet. But the kind of quiet you can breathe in rather than the kind that presses the air out of you. Errol moved first. He filled the kettle at the small basin in the corner of the workshop. He set it on the portable element beside the radio. He got 2 cups from the shelf, mismatched cups, the kind that accumulate in workshops over years without anyone choosing them, and he made tea. He did not ask Elon how he took it. He made it the way he made his own, strong and plain. Bertrand put it on the workbench beside the clippings. Elon wrapped both hands around the cup. He looked at the steam rising from it. "You should have called," he said. His voice was quiet, not accusatory, not the voice of someone reopening old wounds for the satisfaction of seeing them bleed again. Just a statement of something true. Something that needed to be said and received and acknowledged before anything else could happen. Errol looked at his cup. "I know," he said. A beat of silence, and the kettle ticked as it cooled. "I might have answered," Elon said. Errol's jaw moved. He looked at the floor for a long moment. The concrete floor that had absorbed decades of oil and work, and the weight of everything this workshop had silently witnessed. He nodded. It was a small nod. The nod of a man receiving something he knows he does not deserve and is not going to insult by pretending otherwise. They drank their tea. They talked, and not about the large things yet. The large things would take more than one afternoon, more than one lifetime perhaps, and both of them were honest enough with themselves to know it. They talked about smaller things first. The heat of the Pretoria November. The new developments going up near Menlyn on the east side of the city. Whether the jacaranda season was as good this year as it had been in previous years, or whether something in the climate had begun to shorten it. They talked the way two people talk when they are really saying something else entirely. When the surface conversation is just the scaffolding holding up the real one happening underneath. When Elon stood to leave, the sun had moved to a lower angle, and the light inside the garage had turned amber and soft. He looked around the workshop one final time. He looked at the tools on the pegboard, at the radio on the shelf, at the calendar from 2011 that nobody had changed. He looked at the red toolbox on the workbench. He looked at his father. "Keep the clippings," he said. Errol looked at him. "But not in the box," Elon said. "Not in the dark." He walked to the garage door. He stepped out into the late afternoon. The jacaranda flowers lay thick on the pavement. They covered the road in both directions as far as he could see. A long purple corridor stretching away through the suburb, through the heat, through the years. Thomas was waiting at the car. He straightened when he saw Elon coming. He opened the rear door without a word. Sifo was still on the curb. He scrambled to his feet when he saw the man from the newspaper walking toward him. His eyes went wide in the way that 12-year-old eyes go wide when something enormous and unexpected walks directly into ordinary life. Elon stopped. He looked at the boy, at his school uniform, at his school bag with the broken zip held shut by a piece of wire, at the breadcrumbs on his collar from the apricot jam he had eaten earlier, at the brightness in his eyes that no amount of difficulty had yet managed to dim. "What is your name?" Elon asked. "Sifo," the boy said. "Sifo Dlamini." "Do you like machines, Sifo?" Sifo nodded so fast his whole head moved with it. Elon reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He produced a business card and held it out. Sifo took it with both hands, carefully, not as though it might dissolve if he gripped it too hard. "Tell them I said to send you the full school program," Elon said. "Tell them I said all of it." He got into the car. Thomas pulled away from the curb smoothly, quietly, the way Thomas did everything. Elon turned in his seat and looked back through the rear window. Errol was standing at the edge of the garage door. He had his arms at his sides. He was not leaning. He was not performing anything. No, he was just standing there in his stained overalls in the amber afternoon light, watching the car move away down the jacaranda-lined street. He raised one hand. Not a wave, just a hand held up. The oldest and simplest human gesture. "I see you. I am here. Something passed between us today, and I am not going to diminish it by pretending it was ordinary." Elon raised his back. The car turned the corner. The jacarandas dropped their flowers on the empty street between the place where the car had been and the place where the old man still stood. Purple and soft and endless, falling the way time falls, the way forgiveness falls. Not all at once, but falling, That is the thing about forgiveness that nobody tells you when you are young and certain and full of the kind of righteousness that youth carries so easily and sets down so reluctantly. Nobody tells you that it does not arrive like a decision. Yet it does not arrive the way a verdict arrives, clean and final, with a clear before and a clear after. It arrives the way the jacarandas fall in Pretoria in November. Slowly, petal by petal, flower by flower. Until one day you look down and realize the ground between you and another person is covered in something soft, and you cannot point to the exact moment it happened, only to the fact that it has. Thomas drove south through the suburbs. The city moved past the windows. At Pretoria in the early evening has a particular quality of light that belongs only to itself, golden and thick and slightly melancholy, the way the end of a significant day always feels when your body knows that what happened today will not be undone by sleep. Streetlights were beginning to come on. Families were moving behind lit windows. A man was watering a garden with a hose, the water catching the last of the sunlight and breaking it into brief, scattered rainbows. Now Elon sat in the back seat and did not look at his phone. This was unusual enough that Thomas noticed it. In 15 years of driving important people, Thomas had observed that the back seats of his car were where important people were most aggressively themselves, talking loudly on phones, typing furiously on laptops, conducting the full urgent business of their considerable lives in the 45-minute window between one place and the next. This passenger sat with his hands in his lap. On he looked out the window. At one point, somewhere near the Centurion interchange, he said something so quietly that Thomas almost did not catch it. "He kept everything," Elon said. He was not speaking to Thomas. He was speaking to the window, or to himself, or to the specific quality of the evening outside it. Thomas understood this and said nothing. He simply drove, and the city continued to pass, and the words settled into the car around them and stayed there. In the workshop on Linwood Road, Elon Musk moved slowly through the evening routine of closing up. He covered the vehicle he had been working on with a cotton sheet. He hung his tools back on the pegboard in their correct positions. He wiped down the workbench with a cloth until the surface was as clean as a workbench that old can get, which is not very clean but is a particular kind of honest. He picked up the red toolbox. He stood holding it for a moment. And then he did something he had never done before in all the years the toolbox had sat on that shelf. He opened it. He took out the top tray of sockets and set it aside. He reached into the lower compartment and carefully, one by one, he took out the clippings, the printed pages, the magazine covers, the newspaper articles. He laid them out across the workbench in the order they had happened. Zip 2 in 1999. PayPal in 2002. The first SpaceX launch in 2006. The Falcon 9 in 2010. The Tesla Model S. There's the Falcon Heavy. Each one a chapter in a story that had been written on the other side of the world by a boy who had left with one suitcase and turned out to be carrying everything he needed already inside him. He laid the photograph of the small boy on the bicycle at the end of the row. He stood back and looked at all of it spread across the workbench in the amber light of the single bulb hanging from the workshop ceiling. Then he got a length of clean cloth from the supply shelf. He folded it neatly. He placed the clippings on it carefully, one layer at a time, wrapped them, and carried them to his canvas work bag hanging by the door. He placed them inside. He was taking them home, not to put back in the dark, to put somewhere with light. Sifo Dlamini walked home that evening 3 streets over with a business card held in both hands and a feeling in his chest that he would spend years trying to properly describe and never quite manage to. He showed the card to his mother, Nomsa, a hospital administrator who worked long shifts and came home tired. but always found energy for her son. She looked at the card. She looked at Saifo. She asked him 3 times to tell her exactly what had happened, and he told her 3 times, and each time she listened with the expression of a woman recalibrating her understanding of what an ordinary Tuesday afternoon is capable of producing. She made the call the next morning. The Musk Foundation responded within the day. Saifo received the full education program: mathematics, science, engineering fundamentals, computer literacy, mentorship from people who understood that intelligence is not rare, but opportunity is, and that the distance between the two is the only injustice worth spending your life fighting. He is in secondary school now, in Pretoria, in a science stream, moving toward engineering with the particular velocity of a person who has been given both the ability and the belief that the ability is real. He keeps a photograph on the desk in his small bedroom, not of Elon Musk the billionaire, not of rockets or electric cars or magazine covers, of the old man in the garage, Errol, working, honest, present, carrying love in the only container he knew how to use. There is no clean ending to this story because there is no clean ending to this family. Aunt Elon Musk is still alive. He has given interviews in the years since that afternoon that have complicated things further, said things about Elon that hurt, and had things said about him in return that hurt. The relationship between them remains one of the most difficult things in a life that is already enormously difficult in ways the world only partially understands. But in a red toolbox in a garage in Waterkloof, a father kept 100 pieces of evidence that he had never stopped watching. See, he kept them in the dark, under the wrenches, in the place where nobody would find them, and he would never have to explain them. Not because he was hiding them, because some forms of love are so imperfect, so compromised, so tangled up in the damage the lover has done, that they cannot bear to be looked at directly. They can only be folded carefully and kept close, and carried from morning to morning like a tool you are not sure you still know how to use. And the photograph, and the small boy on the bicycle, the 4 words on the back, "My son, my boy." Nobody knows with certainty where that photograph is tonight. But you imagine it is somewhere close to Elon. You imagine he knows exactly where it is. And you imagine that sometimes, in the particular quiet that comes at the end of an impossibly large day, after the meetings and the launches and the announcements and the weight of trying to change the entire direction of the human future, he takes it out, and he looks at the small boy squinting into the Pretoria sun. He turns it over. He reads the 4 words, and for just a moment, before he puts it away and goes back to carrying everything he carries, he is not the most watched man on earth. He is just a boy from Pretoria, loved imperfectly, but loved. And perhaps that is the most human thing about him. Perhaps that is the most human thing about any of us. That we are loved imperfectly by imperfect people who fold their love into small, to private places and carry it through their days in ways we cannot always see. And sometimes, if we are lucky, if we are paying attention, if we walk down the right street in the right suburb in November when the jacarandas are falling, we find it. But finding it is not the end of the story. Finding it is only the beginning of the harder thing, the thing that comes after finding, which has no dramatic name and no clean moment, and no audience and no applause. The thing that comes after finding is the slow, daily, unglamorous work of deciding what to do with what you have found, whether to carry it forward or set it down, whether to let it change you or to fold it carefully back into its box and slide it under the wrenches and go back to what you were doing before. That choice does not get made once. It gets made every morning. Elon Musk turned 73 in the summer following that November afternoon. He still came into the workshop, and not every day now. His back had made its position on full working days increasingly clear, and Errol had reached the age where the body stops asking permission before lodging its complaints. But he came in 4 days a week. He drank his coffee black. He worked on the cars that needed working on. He hung his tools back on the pegboard at the end of the day in their correct positions. The red toolbox was still on the shelf, but it held only tools now, and sockets and spanners and the torque wrench and the feeler gauges and all the other instruments of a working mechanical life. It was a toolbox again, just a toolbox. Doing the job a toolbox is supposed to do. Holding the things that fix broken machines, sitting in the light where anyone could see it. On the wall above the workbench, Birdie had put up a small shelf. On the shelf, in a simple clip frame that cost 40 rands from the shop on the corner, was a single printed photograph. Not a magazine cover, not a newspaper clipping, not the image the whole world knew. The man at the podium, the man beside the rocket, the man whose name had become shorthand for a particular kind of impossible ambition made stubbornly real. It was a photograph of a small boy on a bicycle, squinting into the sun, trying to smile. Nobody in the workshop asked about it. Irian Botha noticed it the morning it appeared and looked at it for a long moment, and then went back to the brake job he was working on without saying a word. Because some things do not need to be said. Because some things explain themselves completely if you are willing to look at them long enough and honestly enough, and without needing them to be more complicated than they are. A father loved his son. He loved him imperfectly, and from a distance, and in the wrong language, and sometimes not at all in the ways that counted. He made choices that cost them both more than either of them has ever fully said in public. He was a flawed and complicated and difficult man who had done things that deserved the hard words Elon put on them. All of that is true. And this is also true. He kept the clippings. He kept every single one. For 20 years, under the wrenches, in the dark, he kept the record of his son's impossible life. He cut out each piece carefully. He folded each one with the particular care that people only give to things that matter to them more than they know how to say. He lay under broken cars on a piece of cardboard in a suburb of Pretoria, and he thought about his son. He thought about him every day. That is not enough. It was never enough. And the gap between loving someone and showing them you love them in a way they can actually receive and use and be nourished by, that gap has swallowed entire families. It has swallowed generations. It is one of the oldest and most common and most devastating gaps in human life. And Elon Musk fell into it the same way countless fathers before him have fallen into it, and countless fathers after him will fall into it still. But Sifo Dlamini, sitting in a science classroom in Pretoria, and working through an engineering problem with a pencil and a focus that makes his teacher stop and watch him sometimes with something close to wonder. Sifo knows something about this that he could not have articulated at 12 and is only beginning to find words for now. He knows that the old man in the garage taught him something. Not with words, not with a lesson or a lecture or any of the formal instruments of teaching. Just by being there. Just by showing up every morning at 7 with his cracked knuckles and his black coffee and his newspaper folded over his heart. Just by fixing broken things. One engine at a time. One morning at a time. Until the boy who watched him understood. In the way that things understood, without words go deepest and stay longest. That this is what love looks like when it does not know how to speak. It shows up. It picks up the wrench. It keeps working, even when nobody is watching, even when the work is small, even when the street outside is empty and the radio is playing to no one and the jacarandas are falling on the pavement in the November heat, and the only witnesses are a fan turning slow in the corner and a toolbox on a shelf sitting open in the light. Open. Finally. In the light. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? We have people tuning in from all over the globe, and we love knowing who is out there. It genuinely makes our day to read every single one. And if this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about your own father, your own family, the things left unsaid between the people you love, please take just 2 seconds and hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it helps this story reach someone out there who might really need to hear it today. Someone who is carrying their own silence, someone who has their own unfinished conversation, on someone who needs a reminder that it is never completely too late. And if you are new here, and this is the first time we have met, welcome. We tell stories like this one every week. Human stories, real stories, the kind that remind you that behind every famous name and every headline, there is just a person, trying their best, carrying what they carry, loving imperfectly in an imperfect world. Hit that subscribe button and join the family. It is a kind corner of the internet, and we are glad you found it. Now, go call someone you love and click on the video appearing on your screen right now, because the next story is waiting for you, and we have a feeling you are going to want to see it.